All right, welcome everybody. Here we are again, Friday for MSP Confidential. And this week I have the wonderful honor and privilege of welcoming a good friend and a friend of the MSP community, Mr. Ray Orsini. Ray, how are you, man? It's good to see you.
Good, brother. Good. How you doing?
Yes, super well. It was so good seeing you last week in New Orleans for the CompTIA year-end planning activities, and we geeked
Yeah,
out a bit on camera stuff. We geeked out on some other things like that, and so always good to have your
still have my
opinion on
toys
some of these things.
here. I still have
So
my camera gear here that I haven't played with, so I'm very excited to play with it.
after our conversation last week, I was motivated to finally come and rearrange the camera stuff on my desk. Which, for anybody that geeks out on this stuff, you know what that means. It's an entire Saturday of taking apart your entire desk, recabling everything, Velcro straps, left, right, and center. And so I finally got my little teleprompter set up, which is why I'm looking at the camera this time around, and I can,
Nice.
do the whole eye contact thing. But I remember asking you, so, "How are you using a teleprompter?" And I was like, "Damn it, that means I have to go put mine on." But how are you, man?
I'm good, man. That's actually what I'm doing. I'm working from home because I'm going to take the last couple of weeks off of the year. So I'm working from home, and this is my home setup, which I've neglected all year long. So now I'm going to be doing exactly that after this. I'm going to be ripping it apart and rewiring everything, and of course, changing a million different things, which will take me all weekend. But it's
And
fun,
we'll
so
we'll
I don't
see you in a
mind.
couple. We'll see you in a couple days, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? When you come out from under the desk. Oh man. Well, listen, I we connected so casually a few years ago, in whether it was a Slack channel or a Discord or one of those things, and I remember when you changed your name on LinkedIn to community champion, and I always, it always made me think about community. Every time I see your name, I always am reminded about community and the reason why we do this, and the reason a lot of MSPs get into this at all is because they have the support of their peers. They have a group of people that's really looking after them, and it seems to be this continuous thing. Like I can't imagine having had an MSP on my end, and I know you had one too, if I didn't have the supportive community. In fact, I wanted to tell you a quick story, and maybe you could reciprocate with one of your own. But the way I got started in consulting was I joined the Apple Consultants Network, and at the time I didn't know anybody in this space, but Mark Cohen, who was a guy who was a member of the Consultants Network at the time, I didn't know him, but he saw me pop up on the consultants locator and he called me out of the blue one day and he says, "Hey, I saw you popped up on the consultants locator. Who are you and what's up?" And it was just so casual like that. I was like, "Oh, cool. Well," and I took it for what it was, which is, an attempt to reach out and connect. And we started talking, and this was the guy that would literally call me because, "Hey, I'm going out to do a server install. You want to tag along?" And then eventually, when I decided to jump off the ledge myself and start doing some of these things, he was my call a friend, lifeline when I
Yeah,
had an issue, and he's the guy that get
he
me out of
does.
trouble. But and so this has left me with this idea of community this all these years, and it's one of the reasons I started talking about how I was building my business and anything that I was doing that I thought people would be interested in hearing. I started sharing, and that's continued. And so I find that this is something we have to pass down to those that are coming after us. Encourage the
Yeah.
community. The information giving, the sharing, and all this stuff. But happy would love to hear one of your stories about community.
Yeah, mine actually goes back even farther than that. But I'm similar path. Actually, when I was 8 years old, I was in Big Brothers Big Sisters, and my big brother was an IBM engineer, and he would take me out to jobs. We'd go out 2 3 times a week. And they had a contract with Eckerd Drugs before, working on their mainframes, their satellite communications, their point of sale machines. And he took me out working on this stuff that I had no business touching when I was 8 9 10 years old. Um, and that's how I learned. I learned at the apprenticeship at the benefit under somebody else. So as I got older, I always wanted to give that back. I always wanted to do that for the community. I had a child very young when I was 20, so joining Big Brothers Big Sisters was not an option. But I've always since day one found the community as my way to give back. That's how you and I met, via the community. Back in my MSP days, I always looked for vendors that were heavily entrenched in the community that I knew I could talk to. Even when I made a big PSA RMM change, and I want to say 2013, 2014, I picked the vendor specifically because of their involvement in the community at the time. knowing full well that if the vendor didn't support me, I'd have an entire community that would help me. And that was before I found Reddit and all the other stuff. So the community's always supported me, and it's got me to where I am today. So giving back is the only logical thing to do, right? So that's why I changed
Yeah.
the title on LinkedIn.
But I find, and you say the only logical thing to do, but I find it's kind of this intrinsic. It becomes an intrinsic thing, and it's usually thanks to some experience or something that sort of gave you that mentality of a giver's gain. And I think eventually we start to try and encourage it and foster it amongst others, and so then we're kind of logically doing that thing. But this feeling of community, I find, is just kind of born from within, in my case at least, and it's a very strong feeling. Like I have been at a few vendors over the last 5 years, and every time somebody asks me what my role is, I always end up eventually talking about how I feel like my role is to be an advocate for MSPs inside of the organization that I'm at, because I feel so close to that community from everything that I did. But that led you, I guess, into the IT business, and you don't talk about it much anymore. Maybe the PTSD of having been an MSP. But tell me a little
As
bit about
Farland
your.
says, we're all recovering MSPs, right?
That's right. I think I see so many folks making the move from MSPs into the vendor community. And I love this because I think it creates more of this MSP advocacy, the transparency, sort of the partner first mentality that I know is so critical for vendors to really have a close connection to the community and build the things that people care about and all that stuff. But I rarely see people moving the other way from vendors to MSPs. And so you certainly made the move to vendor. But I lost your audio, Ray.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So Dustin Bolander and I were talking yesterday, as a matter of fact, about somebody who just made the leap from vendor to MSP and how crazy that was. Like you said, that doesn't happen often. The other way around, though, I can't speak for others, and you and I both share the wonderfulness of having a 3-letter domain name or a 5 total letter character domain name. But whatchamacallit? No, as I was coming up through my MSP years, I loved MSP. There's a couple categories once you start talking to MSPs turned vendors. Some just asked about the quality of their MSP. Some weren't great. Some did it because they found a niche that they found they loved. In my case, I liked working with MSPs better. Don't get me wrong. Password resets, printer jams, adding cyan so they can print in black and white. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love that enjoyment? But at the same time, I really loved working with MSPs. So my background is in complex and distributed network engineering. So multi-city, multi-state, multi-continent, those are the networks I've been building for decades. And so because of that, add to that, I got my CCIE in voice in 2003. I loved working with other MSPs. I've been advising, consulting, helping, helping buddies for the last 20 years. And I realized as I started doing MSP, that required more VoIP. And there was, at the time, early 2000s, 2010s, not a lot of MSPs knew VoIP. So I was doing a lot of just helping people out in Spiceworks, Stack Exchange, whatever. Started doing a bunch of talks, did that for a ton of vendors going around the circuit. And I realized this is so much more fun than going out and hunting for MSP contracts. So it took about 3 years. We sold off the contracts. Some of them we moved off just to better homes that weren't sale worthy, but we sold them individually so we could meet out the transition pretty smoothly. And by 2020, we got rid of our last MSP contract. And it's been full vendor since 2017. We haven't taken any new MSP contracts since. And I love it. I love working with MSPs every day because, like you, I can go to Discord, Slack, Reddit, whatever, and just hang out. That's my job, among other things.
Well, and you are omnipresent, by the way. You're in all the places at all the times, and so I think that's one of the things that people love so much about you in the community is that you are so accessible and available to people. I will say, however, I almost never see you get nerdy about VoIP in the public channels. Whether, and let me maybe ask you a question about this because it feels like this perception about VoIP is changing now. But 10 years ago, I would have been the first to say, I won't touch VoIP with a 10-foot pole, because it was so finicky. There was so much low tolerance, I guess is the best way to describe it, from customers on issues
Yeah.
with voice. And I've heard many MSPs over the years say that about VoIP. It's like, yeah, we stay away from VoIP. But I think from the pandemic to now, in just the last 3 years, there's been so much change with VoIP and just the streamlined user experience and so on. But curious about your thoughts on that.
It's funny because in the 2020s, or the 2020, when the pandemic started, I used to tell people it wasn't that MSPs really changed anything how they were working. It was just they got to show off all the things they had prepared for. The MSPs that had the backup plans and the resiliency plans and whatever DR, however you want to term it, where they could take a fixed location client and then move them to fully remote. There were certain MSPs that were already prepared for that as part of their DR strategy, and they did great. And they did phenomenally, and our VoIP did as well. So much to the point that we offered free phone service for people that were affected by COVID and couldn't break their phone contracts but needed forwarding to work remotely, and we were able to do that, thankfully. But you're right. The late 90s, the early 2000s, it was a whole different world. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. As an MSP, you can guarantee the network you control fully, right? Well, telco, old school POTS, it was the network that telcos controlled fully. And then early 2000s, you're going over the internet, you're still fighting for what, 1.5 megs, if you're lucky, 3 megs, maybe 10 megs, if you're really, throwing a ton of money at it. And the quality of the connections weren't great. Nowadays, you can get 150 megs for $20 a month. You know what I mean? You're not contending the same. So it's gotten easier, like anything else. Like self-driving cars have gotten better. Like any other convenience things have gotten better. Look at the 90s, look at the 2000s. You'd get these Logitech remotes that were completely customizable, had like 300 buttons or touchscreens or whatever nonsense. Nowadays, you can use your cell phone as a remote. The technology has evolved, made life easier. And so, and the problem for MSPs is not that MSPs don't know this, they know this. The problem is all the other suppliers know this too. And just like Earthlink back in the 90s and 2000s was actually North America's biggest MSP, even though they were an ISP. They're seeing it today, and they know they can get into VoIP. Costco sells UMA. Costco also sells IT services. Office Depot sells VoIP. They also sell IT services. So this is no longer a don't offer it because I don't want to offer it. It's a offer it and include it because somebody else is going to walk in the door. And you never want to allow that.
Well, yeah, and I guess my point is that it's so much easier to do it and not sort of have the challenge with the quality of service or some of the issues that you would have been geeking out on in the early 2000s with your CCIE voice. And by the way, I went through my own snobbery period as well. When I started doing MSP contracts, I was including a Cisco ISR router in my agreements because you had to have Cisco or bust. And
it just worked,
I went through, well, and I went through a little phase of having some Cisco voice stuff as well, and I played with my own thing, and the idea of having Cisco phones and that ring is so special, of the Cisco IP phones.
Yeah, they still have the best music on hold. I mean,
well, you know how big the company is by their on hold music, and if you get that Cisco factory on hold music, they're paying for a big contact center.
But a lot of times, you also know how old that system is, right? I mean, how many banks, how many hospitals have you walked into that are using old Cisco 8870 or 8851s or 8801s that are 15 years old? And that amazes me too, because when we were buying phone systems in the 90s and 2000s, you have a phone system that lasted 20 years. It went from white to beige to yellow. That was fine. It kept working. Nowadays, everything's IP. You would never leave something end of life, 10 years end of life, still functioning on your network. But people don't think twice about those Q and Unity systems. And they can be updated, but let's be honest, most people that get those Q and Unity systems from Cisco, they're not paying them the yearly maintenance. So it's dangerous.
Yeah, Unity Express is where I got my my.
Yep. Oh, sorry, my dog's behind me.
So Dr. Zoidberg. I'm not sure if you recognize the username.
Oh yeah.
Ray was one of the first people to tell me what I could be doing, that I could be doing better with selling voice, and I was never an OIT client. And I think this kind of summarizes a bit of what this MSP community really is about. And sure, you get some of the in Facebook groups and some of the places, you get some of the folks just jumping in, asking some of the same questions over and over again. But I think once you realize that the person is making an honest effort to try and improve something about their business, and really, asking a genuine question, it's incredible to see how the community rallies sometimes around these folks.
Yeah.
Another example of one such person is Kelvin, who you know well, Kelvin Tehela.
Yeah.
And Kelvin is one of the guys that has jumped on a phone call with me to help me troubleshoot a PowerShell script, years ago. And so there's something commendable about that. There's obviously people that abuse that too. And I asked this question of Kelvin when I had him on the stream, and I wanted to ask the same question of you. Have you encountered situations where people have abused a bit of your generosity, I suppose? And
Um,
and I know a lot of people that would maybe shy away from being community driven because they just don't want to deal with that. And so I feel there's a little fine line, and maybe there's some advice to give to those folks to handle that better, so that they're not, shying away from being involved.
I'm going to make this sound incredibly simplistic. I'm very much a black and white kind of guy. I treat it the same way as I treat MSP clients or VoIP clients or anybody else in my life. It's about setting expectations, right? You and I are friends. We have a good friendship. There's a line you and I both won't cross with each other in terms of how we talk to each other. Why why can any other engagement be any different, right? If they reach out, you ask for help. I love offering help to anybody that asks. And like Dr. Zoidberg says, I don't care if you're asking about OIT VoIP or not. I just recommended somebody to use the same platform I do. I get zero benefit out of that other than knowing that they're going on the right path and not making any of the mistakes I made in the past so they can make all brand new mistakes. But there's when somebody reaches out and they ask for help, and if there's something that's going to be like a recurring thing, or that's going to take a ton of time, I'll tell them, look, this is going beyond what I feel comfortable that I can do without a paid engagement, and here's what I would do if I wanted to look it up on my own, or we can continue with the paid engagement. And most people, they don't get offended by that. You do have the people every once in a while that'll get really upset that you're not going to give them 40 hours a week for free of your own time. But that's just part of life. It's there's nothing you can do. It's just you take it and realize that's one troublesome egg versus the other thousands of people you help on a regular basis. You do the same thing. I've never heard you tell scale pad in a community, but you help everybody. You give advice all the time on a million topics. So how do you handle when that comes across your desk?
Yeah, I feel like I'm maybe lean more into some of the business level advice of things, which
Mhm.
seem to more generally have a finite beginning and end to this amount of advice. Technical issues just have a way of finding their own water paths, and they can go on
Yeah.
forever. And I think it just depends. I guess you're right. Self awareness is a big part of that. I one of the things I talk to people whenever I'm giving any kind of advice is self awareness. And I remember listening to this YouTuber, Cody Sanchez. I'm not sure if you've come across her, but Cody Sanchez, kind of a self-starting business person, just buys boring businesses and does this stuff. But one of the things she talks about, which is super interesting, is she loves to go see how people order coffee at Starbucks or whatever. Because if there's a line of people behind them and they're taking 5 minutes to order, they just completely lack self-awareness and are not have no issue inconveniencing everybody else for their issue.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of, I think, that rub, I suppose, with people that overextend the welcome of help, and that just are maybe they're having a difficult issue, and they couldn't communicate or articulate particularly well that they would love a little bit of extra help just to get past this issue, or where that need is going to end. And so in the face of somebody who is not able to say or set expectations or put some guardrails around the thing, sometimes we just end up giving help indefinitely. And it's an acquired skill. Like, I think you say it very plainly and it's super easy. It sounds obvious and logical.
It sounds easy.
Uh, yeah, yeah.
It's not
But I
it's not
think,
easy when you're being friendly, helping somebody that they have a need, right? That's not. I recognize it's simple. but it's not simple in practice, right? When somebody's telling you, look, I'm in a really tough situation, I may have clients down, I may whatever, I get it. Yes, there could be dire straits. And again, you can point them toward the right direction um, without just leaving them out in the cold, right? It doesn't mean you have to be the answer. And sometimes you're not the best answer. Look, I tell people, look, I don't have the time for this. Not that I don't appreciate you, not that I don't want to help, but right now it's a bad time. Um,
Mm.
and you do mention an interesting thing, the lack of self-awareness, right? You and I are both multilingual. You and I both work in global communities, different cultures, different cultures, different regions are going to treat asking for help differently, right? Some may have a higher expectation of what you're willing to give or what you should be willing to give them. Sometimes they don't. So, it does take some learning, it does take some experience, it does take some finessing, and you're going to screw it up every once in a while. It just happens. And so unfortunately, you'll piss off somebody every once in a while, not by choice, not by intention, but it happens. Um, and just do what you can. At the end of the day, we're all just trying to make this world a better place, right? Like that's the goal. So
Yeah. No, great comment. And I want to maybe segue into make the world a better place. So obviously everything is always evolving, everything's always improving. And I'm curious, I'm going to ask you maybe a deep philosophical question on this, but how do we make the community better? What are some of the things that you feel you'd love to see a more immediate change or evolution happening in terms of improving it? And I suppose you have to define what better looks like in that situation, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
it's funny, the CompTIA YEPM event, we got real deep one night. And this was not a drunken conversation. This was like at the end of one of the sessions. Um, but we got real deep into what impact we wanted to leave on the earth when we on our final day. And we talked about like what do you want to be remembered? Do you want to leave a legacy? What do you want to do? And my feedback was when I look back, I'm not looking for who remembers me. I'm looking back to see so I can think back of all the lives I've touched, all the impacts I've made, whether they acknowledge it or not. I want to know that I did good, right? Um, and that's right now, that's 100% focused on MSP. What does good look like? Well, you were an MSP, you became a vendor. You know very well as I do. In a lot of situations, the MSP sees it as them versus the vendor, right? But on the vendor side, you realize the vendors are real people. They're normal people. It's easy to say this is a giant company. They have hundreds of employees. They don't care about me. But the truth of the matter is, it's you, me. It's how many of us, right, that are in the community every day trying to do better every day. And I can say that for a lot of companies. And so bridging those relationships, how to better engage them. And I've actually submitted this as talks before. I probably should have submitted it for Rejection Con. But how to make your vendor your best friend. Because realistically, that's an account manager's job. That's a success manager's job to be that resource for the vendor, for the MSP. And it doesn't have to be a combative or contrarian relationship. It can absolutely be a symbiotic relationship, even if there's no financial transaction. People want to help others. And I would think MSPs should want to help their vendors become the vendors they want to work with. And every vendor I know has a pack, right? Every vendor wants to hear what the MSPs want. It's just we need to do better. I say we. I still talk like I'm an MSP. MSPs need to do better than just going to Reddit and complaining about vendors, as opposed to having actual conversations.
Yeah.
And if you ask me what a better MSP world looks like in 5 years, it's one where vendors and MSPs are working together to solve the security challenges, to solve the liability, the risk, the breach, the data leakage, and we create a much stronger, more secure, more defensible platform for all.
Yeah.
Whether that's our security stance, whether it's our training, whether it's our actions, but seeing vendors and MSPs actually work together the way every vendor markets that they do and every MSP wishes that it would, to see that come to fruition, I think would be an amazing thing.
Yeah. Dr. Zoidberg contributes a better MSP world, less gatekeeping without lowering the standards. And I think maybe there's two issues there which are interesting to talk about. One, the gatekeeping. I think this is maybe an organic progression of companies as they get larger. There's just more red tape naturally, and more. There's more layers of people, and people will just naturally fall behind another layer of people and another layer of people. I see this happening. We were just talking about this with ScalePad. We're getting ready to launch a community for our partner base. And one of the objectives that I kind of articulated early in the strategy process of this, I'd love to get more of our engineers in front of our partners, more of our product managers in front of our partners. Surprisingly, the engineering team was excited about this because I think
Yeah.
they also feel and suffer a bit of that layer of people that they're kind of hidden behind. And this transparency is great. And this is one of the things I feel MSPs love so much about the small vendors is that they're often talking to the founder engineer of that company.
Yeah.
And then as those companies get acquired, they start to lose a bit of that inside, relationship. And so then this turned into the snowball effect of like, oh, well, you're acquired. I hate you now. And so it was a very quick progression from I'm a fan of yours because you're a small, nimble startup to
Yeah.
I hate you because you are a big company. And there doesn't seem to be a happy medium that we can all live in, cordially and happily.
It's
But
it's funny because you ask 5 MSPs, you'll get 9 answers on the same question, right?
yeah,
And I don't think MSPs know what they want to do. I think the answer is actually pretty simple. It's hard for us, but in my mind, again, I think it's pretty simple. We spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on marketing, trying to be at events, trying to do all these giveaways and these promos and these ad campaigns to get people's eyeballs. If we took a tenth of that and invested in actually communities, making sure people are in the different Facebook groups, making sure people are in the different Reddit communities, Slack communities, whatever, um, it wouldn't take nearly even a tenth of that marketing budget would be overly gross. It's not necessary. But if you go where the MSPs are, which you do a fantastic job of. But if you go where the MSPs are, you can hear directly what they want to hear. And there's communities like MSP Geek that already foster this, right? They build this for
yeah,
you. I'm very proud to say we had our Discord community probably before, I want to say, almost any other vendor. And the way we did it differently is it wasn't just have a Discord community. It was, we have representatives from every department of our company. Now we're smaller, we're sub 50 people, but we have representatives of every company in the Discord. So you could tag finance, you could tag admin, ops, HR, if you wanted to, for God knows what reason, or reporting or support or sales, or account management, and they're all there. It's not foregoing any ticketing processes, it's not foregoing any other communications channels. It's just an additional way to reach. And we do the same thing in MSP Geek and Facebook groups and stuff like that. But it's how long have vendors been pitching single pane of glass, right? And MSP supposedly wants single pane of glass. Well, they don't want that. They want to not have to leave where they're at to go find you. And if you can find them where they're at, whether it's Slack, Facebook, Discord, Reddit, whatever, and just be there. Oh, thanks. If you can just be there where they're at, I think that's all that matters.
yeah, nice hat, Kelvin. So nice of you to join us, man. We were talking about you earlier. Your ears must be burning. None of it was good, by the way.
None of it, not a iota. He doesn't cook well. He doesn't speak well. He doesn't provide to the community and give, free resources for all of us to do better. He's a horrible guy. So,
Speaking of terrible people, we're just joking, of course. For anybody that doesn't know our sarcasm yet, that was literally the opposite of how we feel. Yeah.
we agree with
Here's a
Calvin.
little love
Yes.
for Kelvin. Kevin Teggles. Yes, that was Teggles that just joined us. I am proud to be one of the few that I get commended by Kelvin every time I say his last name because I say it properly. Tegelar. I even put a little throatiness in the G there. And so,
You see,
in
I
case you were
butcher
wondering,
it every time. But at
don't
this
try.
point, we've just leaned into it, right? Like at this point, it's just fun. But I'm glad there's one of us that can pronounce it properly. Probably you, Brian, and Brian Johnson, and that's probably it. And Heather Johnson. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So just going back to the topic, the MSP community and their relationship with vendors. And I think vendors take way too long to figure out, how to set their own expectations with the community or to jump in, head first to be in the community. Because either you're product focused or you're kind of community focused. And I find that in the early stages of building a company, it's hard to be both things.
Oh yeah.
Interestingly, there's people that do that very well. For example, Marnie and Alex with
Yep.
Lifecycle Insights were the perfect example of a couple of people who were deep in the throes of trying to build a company that they started literally as recently as 2019, but were part of the community from a very early stage. And even though Marnie has exited Lifecycle Insights, she's still very much attached to every single nook and cranny of the community, whether it's being invited to speak on customer success, because she truly had expertise in this area, and people are finding value from her learnings and everything that she's sharing. So that's really neat to see, and it's special when you see it happen. But vendors do kind of split the forked road and go either down this really product centric path or this really community centric path. And I find the community-centric path won't survive unless the product is good, too. So that's a challenge. And that brings me back to OIT VoIP, because I feel like it's really tough to be a VoIP vendor in the space unless you have a really great product. And aside from having you boast about OIT VoIP and how great you guys are, which I know you hate doing,
Yeah.
I want to say it on your behalf, because it's obvious how much MSPs love working with you guys, and so congratulations on just being that to the community, because it's not easy. When we chatted recently, you showed me that you are now your own network also for cellular, and that got me into this rabbit hole of thinking about, geez, what a great opportunity when it's so easy to do this kind of stuff now. Compared to 10 years ago, for an MSP to be able to come into a client and be like, yeah, we can handle your mobile workforce. Here's this big opportunity for us to do all of that, and have a vendor like OIT VoIP, backing that. But tell me a little bit about the cellular piece, because I don't think that gets discussed enough. I think you were guilty. You said you were guilty of not even marketing that very well, but
It is. It's the most ridiculous thing, and it's like, okay, I'm a horrible marketer. Let me just put that out there. But yeah, we launched.
You were an MSP, so that it doesn't. It
that
suffices
lines
to
up,
say.
right? That's right. The skill set. So we launched in 2020. This is how far back it goes. We launched our MVNO solution, so you can actually have either physical SIM or eSIM on your cell phone, and we're not using mobile apps anymore. We're using actual voice over LTE, or 5G, whatever it happens to be. And your cell phone, the native dialer, native SMS, becomes an extension of the PBX. That means no more contracts, no more cell phone stipends, no more. They can just easily add a data only, or not a data only. They can easily add a voice and SMS only SIM, or they can add one with data to be the primary cell phone. And that means, how many salespeople you have. Salespeople hate using anything but their cell phones. Or how many places have poor data connection, poor Wi-Fi, and they need to use native cell phone connection for voice. This solves that. And then you have it all poured back into the same PBX platform. So same extension dialing, same auto attendance, call queues, transfers, call history is right there, which for any sales organization is the holy grail, right? You need the data, which means you can use your cell phone, still have CRM integrations. We're the only ones that do that with all the major platforms used by MSPs. And to my knowledge, we're the only ones in the MSP space offering this. There is no other VoIP vendor doing it. And it's impressive when you go to your client. And also, this is the bane of my existence with people that knock on your door, try to sell phone service. And you're like, no, I'm my own phone company. That's a 45-minute conversation. Don't ever do it. But to a client, when you can sit there and scroll down and show that it's your company name on the VoIP network on your cell phone, that's badass. And it's impressive, and it works every time. So yeah, it's something we need to do a little better job of putting out there.
Well, this is my 2 cents to my audience here with the MSP Confidential stream, to let people know you're doing that, because I was geeking out about it, and I thought if I were an MSP, I might want to consider looking into running my own cell phone service, basically backed by OIT VoIP, so I could have a bit of that presence. It's kind of the white label without the white label too, because I think one of the challenges, and this, maybe you can speak to this with VoIP a little bit too, because I see this happening, but 5-10 years ago, everybody wanted to be, MSP name X service, my
Yeah.
EDR service, my VoIP service, my this, and that. And I find that there's some distancing happening from a legal standpoint of, MSPs. They want to leverage the name that some of the vendors have made for themselves. And this certainly is the case with folks like Cisco and the big companies that sell hardware, because you kind of want to rely a bit on that industry recognition that that vendor
Yeah.
has. But that wasn't always true with some of the upstart security vendors or upstart VoIP vendors and so on. But even then, I think now some of this cybersecurity liability challenges are kind of driving people to just do more partnerships and assign liability where it lies. But curious to hear your comments on that with respects to the VoIP space, anyways.
I've heard both. I definitely, and we offer both. We have channel partner where you do it as the OIT brand if that's what you're comfortable with, and you have ones that do it as your own brand. I find larger organizations, and it doesn't take much. Larger organizations tend to they want to own the whole stack. Large organizations, I've seen their sale models are a little more mature, where they're clear with the client on where the edges are, and I think that's really where the biggest headaches come from. It's when the MSP doesn't accurately describe to the client, yes, we're providing this solution, but understand there's other players in the game. It's no different. We've all submitted tickets to our local phone company and taken forever because there's something on the back end or whatever. The telco never tells you, but back end sometimes means somebody else's network, and we have to go through and talk to them because just like the internet, that's how phone service works. It's a bunch of interconnected networks. And so I get the whole it's not me, it's OITVoIP's problem if I'm the MSP. And I get there is some quote unquote protection there, but at the end of the day, you still did the recommendation, right? It's still your word on the line. And what started me to offer voice, because I originally wasn't going to offer voice in my MSP, what started me doing it was I got tired of being on hold with all the other phone companies. I got tired of having my engineer that's making 150, 200 grand a year, whatever, sitting on hold with a phone company for 45 minutes to make a change we could have done in 20 seconds. And it's not just about us. It's about the client waiting, right? We know MSP time. Client submits a ticket. It wasn't the minute that problem happened. It's maybe they let it sit. Maybe they tried fixing it themselves. Maybe they made it worse. Maybe they forgot about it for a while and then just it happened again and now they're frustrated. But by the time they submit the MSP ticket, you're already behind the eight ball. And then if you have to escalate to a vendor, it's even further. So I originally looked for vendors that operate on an MSP time, right? That operate as quickly as I needed to operate. And then on the voice side, I realized there are no voice vendors that operate on MSP time. So I
Yeah.
said, we'll just do it ourselves. And that's how we started. And it's made life easier. So even when we pitched MSPs today, I talked to them about MSP time versus telco time, right? You call Comcast, they'll fix it sometime between Thursday and, autumn of 2035. MSPs don't have that luxury. They need now. And they need vendors that understand now. And so we not only provide them now, but we also provide them the resources so they can do it themselves now. And that's a big deal. That's a huge difference.
So you kind of glossed over this, but I want you to maybe double click on this. Hey, I'm tired of being on hold. I'm going to start a VoIP company, and I feel like there's maybe a couple of there's a spectrum
Yeah.
there, maybe. And the reason I think it's interesting is because there's probably folks listening that are internal IT, and they're like, you know what, I'm tired of internal IT. I'm going to go start an MSP. And again, that's kind of people summarize it just like that in the future,
Yeah.
but there was a little bit of a deep dive to get
Yeah, no,
into
no, it
there.
wasn't like from 1 minute to the next. Even though anybody who knows me probably thinks that's exactly what happened. No, it's whatchamacallit. No, I'm a data driven guy. We used BrightGauge when we were an MSP, and even before BrightGauge, we used Connect Smart or whatever it was. I've always been dashboards, data, analytics. That runs my company. Period. Um, and so I looked at the time. So, this wasn't I should add also, I was helping phone companies still. We were doing a ton of consulting for phone companies, AT&T, CBON, Birch, Windstream, so on and so forth, Comcast, where we were installing and selling phone systems for them. So it wasn't an expertise we didn't already have. It was just something we didn't do because A, I didn't want to mess my relationship up with these telcos. And B, that wasn't our core skill set, right? We were focused on business. And so it wasn't until I looked at it and we had spent, I want to say $30,000 or $45,000 in 1 year just on hold time, because at MSPs we all do vendor management, right? Or should. That's what keeps the vendor from upselling the client on the thing that's just going to screw up your overall design for the client's network. That's why we do it. And so I did look at the financials though of how much time we were spending on hold, and it was $30,000 or $45,000, something like that, because it was so far back. But of that, it was like 60% of it was telco or ISP vendors. And so that was the final point where I said, okay, well, let's look at what the cost and what's the investment and the return for going reseller route. And we did the reseller route with Cordell and SkySwitch and some others. And that was the right financial decision at the time. And eventually we, like anything else, I said, there's a better way to do this. And we ended up deploying our own somewhere around 2014, 2015. But we did that because we saw the market need, just like on the vendor side. If those vendors answered immediately, there would never be an OIT VoIP today. Well, maybe there would be for other reasons, but but it was causing significant problem. And again, it was causing significant problem for our clients. You know what I mean? Do the math. The number of hours we were sitting on hold waiting to solve a client's problem was a big deal. And we got better client satisfaction when we started handling everything ourselves, because now they didn't have to work. And now we could proactively say, we know this marketing campaign's coming up. We know this sales initiative's coming up. We know these holidays are coming up. And we could start taking care of these things in advance for the client, which is the premise of MSP, right? That's what we're supposed to do. Think about it in advance, get it solved for the client. So, but you need the capacity to do that. And becoming our own VoIP vendor gave us that ability. And it is powerful. And to the MSPs that are getting other MSPs come try to sell to you every single day, or try to sell your clients every single day. Think about it. When your client can say, oh no, my MSP includes my VoIP, they include this, they include that. The competition can't always do that. So that's a helpful thing to have in your pocket too.
So I not to simplify what you're saying, because there's a lot to unpack there, but one of the things that kind of jumped out is this idea of the sense of urgency. And I think this is a key attribute and trait of people that come into the IT business overall. And I was wondering if you think sense of urgency is something that can be taught, or is it something that kind of just naturally exists within people?
I hope it can be taught. It's one of our core values in the company. So it's one of our 8 core values. And it doesn't mean the hard part of teaching now is not urgency. The hard part of teaching now is, in my opinion, is prioritization. Now could easily be, I'm documenting this so I can schedule it for later. That's fine. What happens to most people is, I'm not going to write it down. I'm going to remember to do this later. And that never happens. That's what the now tries to resolve. Now could very easily be, you call me with an issue that I can't resolve immediately, but I can give you workarounds until we resolve it. That's now. I'm good with that. You know what I mean? It's no different in the backup world, right? RPO and RTO. It's one thing to be able to say, we got you, we have the backups fully restored, and how long between the incident and, our last backup, but also how quickly can we get back up and running? That metric is not how quickly can we get back to the state we were before the issue. It was how quickly can we get up and running, right? Triaging. And so you call most phone companies and you say, my app's not working, or I'm not receiving calls, or I can't dial this number. I've never, ever, ever heard any single one of them give me any kind of workaround to get me up and running immediately. Versus that is part of our triage process. Are there any workarounds? Can we get the client up and running immediately while we wait for a tech to work on their problem? And so, yes, it can be taught, but I think you have to remember the other stuff, right? It's like saying, can you teach cooking? Yeah, but you're going to teach knife skills. You're going to teach food preparation. You're going to teach, the chemical reactions that happen with the different ingredients. It's not just now. It's all the other stuff that goes with now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of failure that really happens. People just look at it as, do everything right away. And that's not really what now is.
Yeah. Well, and to follow your analogy a little bit, there's a couple more ingredients perhaps that are very closely tied to sense of urgency, which is maybe this idea of accountability and follow through, because I find that, that's that little space in between intention and action is kind of where integrity sits, right? And
Yes.
you can be, I guess, fairly labeled as lacking integrity, but this is how people feel. And this is one of the challenges I feel for MSPs in their delivering service to their customers. but also in vendors and how they support their MSPs. And so, maybe speak to a little bit of that follow through and accountability and how you encourage this within your team, because I feel like people struggle with just staying on top of stuff, and it maybe lack of process, but I feel that it's
Yeah.
also sort of an attribute that people generally have.
I'm trying to figure out how you're reading my core values, because accountability is another core value of ours.
I'm
Um,
not. I'm
and
not these, but I guess you're closely aligned
uh,
to things that are
yeah,
important, and so I love that you have. I'm gonna go check them out right now so I can continue just
right.
rattling them
We
off
don't
here.
market them anywhere unless it's on a job posting. We don't actually market them anywhere. These are things internal, but accountability, understanding, big picture communication. Um, but the accountability part of it, again, it's the devil's in the details, right? There's the old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Um,
Mm.
and so, you know, it's one thing to be accountable. And I think what happens, at least what has tended to happen at OIT, I can only talk for myself here. Um, we'll have people that will think accountability is me taking it and handling it all the way through. And unfortunately, you and I both know, as the respective faces for our companies, we sometimes get asked something that we have no power to fix ourselves, but we have the resources behind us. Get to the right person, have them fix it, right? Um, and so what'll end up happening is, with those best of intentions, I've done it myself. Somebody will ask me to fix something, and I'm technical. I think I know how to do most stuff, and I end up screwing it up worse than if they'd just gone through the process. So accountability in OIT world is, yes, Luis, you told me you have a problem. I'm going to make sure I get with the right people. I will stay on top of it to make sure those right people are getting the job done. I will have touch points. I'm taking accountability for the problem and the resolution. Doesn't mean I'm affecting the resolution. And I think that's the part that most people miss. It doesn't mean you have to do all this stuff. You can still be accountable, but make sure it follows the process. Now that requires your process to also take care of people, right? So it's you got to plan for a few different things. It's a lot easier said than done, but you can have accountability where you go in and you say, okay, I know what Luis is asking for. I practice understanding. I understand what he's trying to accomplish and what needs to get done. I'm going to communicate with my other stakeholders, whoever is going to be involved in solving the problem, and I'll communicate back to Luis, tell him what's going on and who's solving it, and I'll check in along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, I'm not the one actually solving the problem. I'm just making sure it's getting resolved. That to me is still accountability. Um, so that's I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I view it anyway.
Well, you see it happen even in just, I guess, the account management process. You see this happen between MSPs and their vendors. Sometimes, MSPs are incredibly protective over the one account manager that they have at a vendor that
Oh
is
yeah,
actually communicative with them, and that they know, and that they know that person advocates for them and champions their needs, and this type of thing. And so this is kind of, I guess it's a cultural thing to some extent, and some
yeah.
people have it built into their persona, and other companies just have to do a little bit more work to teach that inside their ranks. Is someone going to answer the door? Says Matt Solomon. Uh,
That's my Instacart. Hopefully my wife gets it. So
yeah, I was trying to ignore the doorbells. I still heard everything you said, though, Ray. I will
I'm
say.
sorry about that. I didn't realize it was getting picked up.
No, I don't think I turned on the noise reduction for your interview channel, so that's my bad. I love this conversation around these attributes, because I think there's just so much growth opportunity there for people, in the career path conversation. I was having a little bit of this conversation with the guys from Empath the other day. They came on the stream. We were talking about education and upskilling. And I feel like there's always this conversation that kind of yields, whenever you talk about career path, it seems to be this vertical conversation always. It's like, what's my next, up the ladder type of role, and how much more pay is that? But there's almost never a conversation about broadening your accountability, what I would consider actually hard skills, not soft skills necessarily, but your elasticity in your current role, and deepening some of that. And so I'm curious if you guys do anything at OIT VoIP to sort of map out deepening of the current role, whether it's by levels or just simply putting some guardrails around some of the achievements that people can do to up level those particular roles. Oh, lost your voice again there. Maybe you muted so we wouldn't hear the doorbell.
And
There you go.
Test, test. There we go. Dr. Zoidberg, sorry about that. Cable issues. Again, shoemaker's kids. I'm working from home.
Oh, we lost you. I think the cable is maybe finicky there, and so
Yeah,
it's
it's the
yeah.
cable. Sorry, I pulled it. Dr. Zoidberg was at the ITNC session with me for Empath, where Kyle, Wes, and Alex were talking about exactly this, about building the career paths and stuff like that. And Zoidberg was laughing because he was like, at OIT, we already do it. So we're firm believers. We instituted OKRs, objectives and key results. Not a, I think this came out of Google originally, but Google, Zappos, shop.com, huge companies use this. And so we instituted that, I want to say 3.5, 4 years ago. We set OKRs every quarter. This is set with the employee and their manager. The employees are expected to bring up things that they want to work on over those 12 weeks of the quarter. The manager is expected to do the same. And then they will map out that over the next 12 weeks for an hour a week or 2 hours a week. And we build time during work to do this. That hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it happens to be. But they need to complete that. We make sure these objectives are completable within those 12 weeks. And each 2 quarter period is part of their one of the criterion used for their compensatory evaluations every 6 months. And so we're huge on building career paths and making sure employees know where they need to go. Employees know that any position they're in, they're going to be in for a minimum of 2 years. We want to build expertise in the position before they move on to the next thing. 2 years is about the minimum needed. Similarly, in our tech teams, all of our tech teams start out on help desk. Help desk teaches so much compassion. It teaches communication. It teaches understanding urgency, understanding somebody else, being able to establish communication with somebody else that may have a different education or experience level than you, or even a different vocabulary than you, and you need to figure out how to accomplish and communication with them. So all of these things, you learn how to de-escalate. You learn how to handle people having emotional breakdowns. Help desk solves a lot, and so it teaches all these things. And so we do that with every role. Everybody in the company knows what they're going to be doing today and what the goal is for a year from now. And we build it, and that changes. It moves between, as they evolve, just like all of us. We went to college and, it changed while we were in college what we were trying to do. It's no different here. And so you want to, sorry, I know my phone's going off.
Oh, lost your audio there too.
We want to make sure they have expectations. You know what I mean? And I think just like we talked about in the beginning, with those people looking for help setting expectations, your employees that work for you need to set expectations. And I will talk until my dying breath to make sure every employee candidate out there, anybody that goes looking for a job, questions their prospective employer, asking, how are you going to help build my career? Not give me a paycheck. How are you going to build my career? And I invite everybody to do that. That should be a base requirement along with your compensation.
Yeah. Did you ever do this with the MSP, or is this something you finally, evolved into with OITVOIP? Because this, again, is the challenge, I think, for a lot of MSPs with 3-person companies. These types of frameworks don't necessarily come to bear fruit right in that moment. And then suddenly you find yourself at 15 or 20 people kind of behind the 8 ball. And now it's kind of like this patchwork of trying to find ways to have an intelligent career path conversation. But curious to know sort of what you saw from that side of the equation.
It's funny. It's funny because I when I talk about it, should get comfy and cozy.
Sorry,
with
you're
vendors,
breaking
especially.
up a tiny bit there.
Sorry, those MSPs. It's funny because those MSPs that whatchamacallit, I talk about MSPs becoming close with vendors, right? And those MSPs, especially that became vendors, how many MSPs do you know that started just because they were good at something? They had no business plan. They had no, nest to fund this thing. They had no plan for when they were going to start generating revenue. They just knew they were good at something and maybe somebody wanted to buy something. Well, vendor is a little different. It's a little harder to become a vendor without any kind of business plan. And most MSPs that have moved over have already learned from their MSP, and hopefully that guides their business plan for a vendor. The reason I say all that is because I had the benefit with my MSP. Yes, to your question, yes, I did this. Even when I was small, with my very first employee, within 6 months, I hired my first tech, and he had a career plan. But also at that size, I knew that my MSP that was 1 to 10 employees as we grew, uh, that was a launching point. That wasn't a final career place. That was a launching point to the next place. I didn't have benefits. I didn't have great pay. This was somewhere to learn, cut your teeth, build experience, go get a job somewhere else within a couple of years. But I had that conversation with him up front at hiring time. So we knew what to expect. So nobody was just disappearing on me when they found another job. I'd help them look for other jobs. I'd help them build their resumes. And I took it as a point of pride when they found the next job. That was part of their career path. As I got bigger, as I got more resources, now we can offer all those amazing things. Now we are the landing spot for a lot of people. But understanding where you lie in that and how you can affect the person's career path, it doesn't mean you need to be the one providing all the resources. Still doesn't mean you can't provide them a good launching point, right? But you need to understand where you are to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. So much opportunity for learning there, and this is again back to the community kind of full circle. I see so many great conversations from MSPs, MSP owners, perhaps in some of the owner specific channels that pop up here and there. Be like, how do I deal with this issue? Somebody please, give me the lowdown of how you've managed this in your MSP. And it's interesting to see when an owner that has maybe grown past some of the growing pains, I guess is the best way to describe it. And it's always obvious to me how we forget about the nuances of the details, right? The devil's on the details, you said, but because it's so pragmatic once you've done it and solved it and moved on to the next issue, it just seems so simple to address. But in that moment, like the perception of the challenge is always so much bigger, and I guess the emotional involvement you have in that issue, because you're not only just trying to solve a career path issue for an employee, but you're also dealing with like, is this the right thing to do? Is this going to kill my business? Am I paying them enough? Like, there's so many things that are challenging your own self-worth,
But
even as a
but you've
leader
been
in
there,
that
Luis.
situation.
Like you know how hard it is to find talent. You know how hard it is to be able to afford talent to begin with. So when you have somebody that you've already built a budget for and you can already have in your house, you want to do everything possible to keep that person. And again, when you're the jumping point, now you have to realize that, as a smaller MSP, they're probably not going to spend their life with you unless you give them some ownership or some other reason to. But otherwise, barring that, if you're a jumping point, isn't it better to have that conversation up front to say, look, I know within a year or two, you're going to probably look for somewhere else. I'm going to help you build up to that point, but let's make sure we have open communication. So you have transition plans. So you're getting more than a 2-week notice when the employee is ready to move off. And that's a lot to ask because a lot of employees feel that their employer will treat them badly if they give them notice. You have to show that you're not going to be that person.
Yeah.
But when you can build that confidence, suddenly you don't have those same pains. Now you can invest in the employee and say, well, I'm building this employee because it's cheaper to build up this employee than it is to hire a new one. And you
Mm.
start getting better and better at building from zero. I worked with a lot of apprenticeships and I serve on the advisory council for a lot of high schools and colleges, advising them on their programs so that when you graduate, you can have marketable skills, either entering the workforce after high school or after college, whatever happens to be. So you eventually get really good at training these people up from zero experience to MSP ready, which in our experience you can do in probably 6 months. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But to
Sorry, I lost your audio there again. That cable is going to be your nemesis today. So much wisdom there, Ray. And we're sort of right at that time where I want to make sure I don't keep people past the top of the hour. Man, there's just so much to unpack here. We're gonna have to do a part two, and maybe at the next conference where we see each other, we can unpack some of these topics and find a little bit of a talk track to come and do maybe a special conversation around this. Bring some experts on the people development side of things. This is just an area that I think MSPs could do so much earlier in their careers, in their sort of setting up their business for success. Yes, because the talent piece is really difficult. It's really tough. And you go through a lot of trouble and a lot of pain getting people in the door. And you got to keep them there as much as you can, at least, that reasonable amount of time. But I think you touch on something super important, which is the reality that you may not be a lifetime, job for the people that you're bringing into the business. And I think it's important to realize sort of what role you play in that person's career path. And if you can be sort of community driven and set them up for success, I think the opportunities that come back to you down the line are incredibly large and fruitful, and it's sort of
100%.
this giver's
Absolutely.
gain mentality, right? So
Yeah, no, and you've mentioned a couple times, but what is it? The Go Giver is the actual name of the book. So Giver's Gain is the mentality behind BNI and a million other places. Go Giver, it's a book. It's like 115 pages. Sean Lardo is actually the one that put me onto it, and now we give it out to all management and staff that want it. It's like 115 pages, totally worth the read, and you start to see what I guess the rest of us already know, that when you give, you get back eventually. That's not the primary motivator for doing it, but it does come back to you.
yeah.
And it's a great book. It's a great way to adjust your mentality, your perception. So I'd strongly recommend anybody if they haven't read it.
Yeah. Well, I love the sentiment. I certainly try to lead a life of giving, and I appreciate how much you give to the community, Ray. It's a great way to transition to say thanks to everybody for attending. I hope some of these topics and conversations are creating a little bit of a spark for extending them into your own networks, and sort of asking some of those questions, and doing more for the community. I think that we just need to continue doing that as a group. And so it's a good opportunity to continue growing in that aspect. I think the more the community grows together, the better we'll be together. Rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. Matt Lee's famous coined phrase at this point. I always give him the attribution now whenever I say that. But
Right? Forget
but it's,
JFK speechwriters. It's definitely Matt Lee gets the credit. Um,
yeah. So
yeah,
thank you so much, Ray. I appreciate your time coming on the stream and hanging out with me for a few minutes. Enjoy the holidays and enjoy your work from home time for the next couple of weeks. And hopefully we'll do this again in the new year.
sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, Luis.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next Friday. And we're always here, MSP Confidential, Fridays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find the feed also on the ScalePad YouTube channel. All the previous episodes are there. And we tend to stream also to my LinkedIn and our Facebook page in case you're hanging out in different spots. But we'll see you at next week's episode of MSP Confidential. Thanks again, Ray. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Ciao.